Read 1923 Ferris, Texas.
Correct.
Let's go back when you were just a little boy. What do you remember?
I remember my dad had a grocery store, and I would climb up on the ledge, and he had all this candy, which I found out wasn't too good, and I would reach in there and get candy. And it was a small community of 1,200 people. And we had, I think, 3 families. And actually, the Ginsburg family is still here. That's about it, what's left of Ferris. There's some people here that lived in Kaufman, Texas, and we got to be friends with them. But, you know, I left there, was maybe 10 years old, and
Came to Dallas then?
came to Dallas when my dad went busted in the Depression, and there was a brickyard there, and all his business was with the people who worked in the brickyard, and everything's on credit. So when they fired everybody, it left him and his brother. They had 2 stores, grocery stores, and they had 2 trucks. And then we moved to Dallas and rented an apartment near John Henry Brown Grammar School. And I was about 10, and went to the 3rd grade at John Henry Brown. And I had a friend named Edwin Ornish, who's passed away. He said he remembered me because I wore boots. Not high boots, but I wore boots. And I liked the school. Her name was Mamie, and I remember I was a monitor that let the kids go by. They called me at home, I had the measles, and said, we appointed you to be head monitor. So that was the first time I had a position of responsibility, and I took it seriously.
Did your folks ever talk about how hard it was during the Depression time for the family? Did you know it when you were a kid that things were going tough?
I knew it. My opinion, we had food to eat, but we were very poor, and I knew that. I never had toys. I had one red wagon, and that's all I can remember, maybe a little train or something. Yeah, I was one of these young people that went to work at 12 years old, and I never quit working till I was 81 or so. So I delivered newspapers, and I worked for cleaners, and I sold shunlatavies, and I sold office rings to graduate. And when I was 12, 13 years old, I was working at the fairgrounds selling Coca-Colas. Consequently, my back has never been the same.
Do you remember your grandparents at all?
Oh, yes. Only one. My grandmother died a month before I was born, but I had, my grandfather was named Mayor Coleman, who I named my son after, and he was very religious. And when we moved to Dallas, I was about 12 years old. We went to Sheriff Israel every Saturday. I sat by him with, I had 2 cousins, George Coleman and Joe Coleman, and both passed away. And we went and sat by him, and of course we didn't understand Rabbi Gold because he spoke Yiddish, and he had a great big tall tallis that he waved over him, but we sat on the front row. And then we would walk to downtown. We had, I think, a dime, and we went to a movie, and if we didn't eat lunch, we could go to 2 movies.
On a dime.
Well, it was probably 20 cents a dime to eat with, but Joe Coleman, uncle, sold Coney Islands right next to the Palace Theater. So he would give us a Coney Island for 15 cents. Now, where I got the 15 cents is, I wasn't working enough to have any money, but we walked from Beaumont Street to Elm Street so we could save the streetcar money and we could go to another show, and that's how we did it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that takes us way back. But my grandfather, if anyone had an effect on my life, it was him, because he was so straight. All he did was practice religion, and we would come back to his house on Beaumont, and we have herring and root beer. And the root beer was stronger than, he also made wine, and that was stronger than the wine because he'd open it and the top would hit the ceiling. But, and he raised pigeons. Never worked. He had 6 sons and 2 daughters. And his whole life was dedicated to being a good Jew.
Now, do you know where your grandparents, the 4 of them, where they came from? Were they
Yes.
from Europe?
I'm part of the Goldman family. My mother was a Goldman. And they came from Zablin, Poland. And they had a big family there. They had a farm. My mother used to tell me about the big pieces of fruit they grew. So I assume that they had a lot of fruit trees. And the boys worked, and they made bread. And my mother would go door to door, and she was about my age at that time when I started to work, and sell bread. So consequently, they were persecuted. So they were able, and I understand they took boxcars to get to wherever they left from. I don't really know. But they came in through Galveston, Texas. And my mother went to work, and she worked. She had 2 children at the time and was divorced. And so that's where I had 2 sisters from the first marriage, and then
Right.
she married my father. My mother came from Zablin, which is not there anymore because my cousins went there and couldn't find it. And now it's part of Russia, was part of Russia. My father was from Russia, and he was born in Odessa, and his father was a prominent lawyer there. And when he rode in the carriage, everybody would bow down to him. Now, I had a cousin that recently passed away. Her name was Sylvia Skolnick, and she told me that story because I didn't know it. And he came and he landed in New York, and he lived upstairs of a grocery store, and the way he told me, lived on salami. But I believe the Reformed Jews really did an excellent job with these. They were all very religious Jews that came over, and they did help them settle. We had the Ships family lived in Dallas, and they had a bakery, and they needed bakers, so they had a way to get here, and all but 2 of them were bakers. And later on, they formed the Goldman Baking Company, and later Wholesome Bread. My dad had a truck line, and I didn't have any of his personality because he smoked and he liked to drink, and he was tough and he was shorter than me, and the tallest I ever got was nearly 5'8", which I'm not now. And one time, what struck me is something I'll never forget. His office was right next to this Goldman Baking Company, and he got upset with a big truck driver, and that truck driver just hit him one blow and knocked him down. So I learned to run instead of fight.
Now, you had 2 sisters.
Yeah.
What did you guys do? What did you do with your sisters for fun, and what did you do that you would die if your parents found out you guys were doing it?
Actually, nothing.
You were that good, huh?
I was I was pretty good. I only remember one spanking in my whole life. And, you know, you didn't, I did what was right, and I respected my parents because that's the way I was raised. And I had a wonderful mother who lived to be nearly 99. She died at Golden Acres. She was there 12 years. And she lived alone for 50 years. She was a widow lady, but 12 years she spent in Golden Acres.
Now, did World War I affect your family at all?
No.
Was your dad in the service?
No.
Okay.
No. He came over in 1906. My mother came in 1912, but because they had family here.
Now, where'd you go to high school?
Went to Forest Avenue High School.
What was high school life like?
Oh, the high school was wonderful. I was elected president of the freshman class, and I ran against this Edwin Arnish, and I was in the debating. I was a good debater, and I always wanted to be a lawyer, but I got married before I could go to school. I went one semester, but I learned to type, among other things, very little, and I never studied because I was working. I had 2 trucks. I was 17 years old. I had a lady working for me because of my illness of my father, and he passed away when I was 17. And they had a big truck line. Him and his brothers called Coleman Brothers Transfer, and but no one to take it over. It was all over the state. And they would call him in the middle of the night and say, we're overweight, and they stopped us. At that time, they had to wait on these bobtail trucks. And I drove one when I was 17 without a license, but, you know.
So you did something.
Well, I thought under the circumstances I needed to make a living.
After high school, were you able to go to college, or did you have to go in the service?
I went one semester in North Texas Agriculture School, which is now the University of Texas at Arlington. And I wore a uniform. I joined the reserves of the Army, and that's where I mentioned I learned to type. And I would hitchhike home. I'd stop at Youngblood's Chicken and get fried chicken, and then hitchhike back downtown, and then catch a streetcar on Lamar Street where we had an office, and then I would work. And, you know, in those days, no one knew they were poor, but we had fun. You know, it was a different time. You could walk the streets, and I always had girlfriends at 11 years old. I was a fast mover. And I might say that I met my wife at Sheriff Israel because during the holidays we had about 3 seats. You had to buy them, and which I didn't know at the time. So I was outside in City Park, and I saw this girl with a purple blouse on and a beautiful smile, and I said, that's for her. And I called her, and she said, I can't go out Saturday. I got to babysit. So I got thinking, and I called her back. I said, how about Sunday? And that was the beginning of a beautiful, and we got married. She was 18, and I was 19.
What year did you get married?
1943, January the 3rd.
1943. Now, but you were already in the service at that time.
No. I was in the reserves, but not in the service.
Right. And then you did get into active duty overseas.
I did.
Where did they send you?
We went first to Scotland and then to Malvern Wells. And I saw it on the map yesterday. It shows up, it's still there. And it was a small little town, and it was pretty safe there. And I first bicycle I ever owned was in Malvern Wells.
Tell me about World War II. Did you see combat? What
No,
what was your position?
I was a sergeant with the, not at the beginning, you realize you spend time doing different things.
Right.
But I was a buck sergeant, they called them, with first sergeants. And I lasted through several sergeants, first sergeant, and I did all their work. And I remember D-Day because we got in patients 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning from D-Day. We had a whole train. I wasn't a medic. I was in a medical, but I was in the first sergeant's domain. I was a head MP. You name it, I gave out passes, and that made me really good in the mess hall later on. And I had a lot of authority, and I had some friends, but not many. And I used to go into Worcester, and I would bring this couple a pound of butter and some eggs, and they would give me dinner on Shabbos on Friday night. And by the way, I did conduct services Friday night for many years, and I have a little book right now that I got from Federation, 1958, and I keep it by my bed.
How was it for Francis when you left for overseas?
Francis went to work for Giberson. It was a defense industry, and I don't know exactly what they did, and she was in charge of the rationing of gas. Yeah. And I don't know what else. And I wrote her a letter every day when I could. She wrote me, I did have some trying times in the Army. I was in one area that had bombing, and
what area was that?
Was it London?
London.
And I slept at Red Cross.
Right.
And next door, they bombed that building next door, which was a little hotel. I was very fortunate. And I was in the Army nearly 3 years. I was overseas. I was in France. And I never knew about the Holocaust. Never. And we had the Army radio and everything. And it was just I felt like something was wrong. I think we should have. And when we captured a lot of Germans, and they were with us, and I didn't even know then. Yeah. I never knew, and I figured that we should have known.
And when you came home, is that when you started your business?
Yeah, it wasn't a smart thing at that time, I want to tell you. My mother-in-law said, you ought to go in the liquor business, and we scraped up $4,000, and we're supposed to build a building at $2,000. Well, it cost $4,000 because I didn't have enough sense to have a guaranteed price. And my wife actually worked for these guys when she was at Giberson, and they built this building, so I had to borrow money to buy inventory, which the most I took in was $50 a day. I went in business in 1946, so it was 54. The salesman came to me and he said, Red, there's one for sale on Samuel Boulevard, and the man's sick, and he wants $5,000 plus inventory. It was like $17,000. Well, there ain't no way I had $17,000, so I went to Julius Shep's, who was a cousin, second cousin, and we were close. Right. And I said, I'm either going to go bankrupt or I could buy this store. I hear it's pretty good. He said, it's illegal for me to loan you the money, but you go see Meyer Rachofsky at the Mercantile Bank, and he'll loan you the money. And that happened, and I bought the store, and I made money the first week. He had his picture on the wall. He wasn't a nice guy. I'm not going to mention his name. and had sawdust on the floor. About after a couple of weeks, I said, I'm taking a picture down and clean the floor. I called it Red Coleman's because I sold the store Red's Liquors.
How many stores did you want?
I had the most, it was 40 stores.
40?
But I had a lot of convenience stores. You still see them around. There's still one left that, thank goodness, my lease runs. It cost me a lot of money. I sold the liquor stores, and I had a bunch of convenience stores.
All in the Dallas area?
Well, we went as far as Richland Hills,
Yeah.
which was Tarrant County.
Right.
And,
But all in this area?
All in this area, yes.
You know, happiest time in your life?
Sure, when I got married, it was the happiest time, and I celebrate all the good things. I mean, since I'm older, and my wife is 91, and she's wonderful. She keeps me up when I'm down.
Now, in your lifetime, you've lived through so many remarkable occasions. Something stand out that you go, I know exactly where I was when it happened?
Pearl Harbor. I was just left my wife's house. I was driving an old car, and I heard that on the radio, and it was just a shock. I knew some presidents in my lifetime. George W. Bush, we're on a first name basis. I called him Governor, he called me Red. And Lyndon Johnson, I met him at a fundraiser, because I did a lot of politics in my lifetime. I knew Ann Richards, and I knew Clements, and I met Eisenhower, and I thanked him for sending me home. I never met Clinton because I said, he can't win, and I was there for someone else. I want to tell you, we're very fortunate to live in Dallas, Texas, and we have a good government. I've been in politics all my life, and in my industry, that was what I used to do. I was head of the United States Package Stores Association. I traveled all over the United States. I was head of the Texas Package Store Association. So I was active in my work, and I think I did some good for my industry. Yeah. I gave back. I started Crime Stoppers in Dallas. And to me, that's one of the best things I ever did. It's the second one. It was my life. I enjoyed working.
9 grandkids, 6 great-grandkids.
True.
What advice does Great-Granddad have for the next generation?
Well, I tell them to appreciate what they are, know their religion, and celebrate the good things. You have to celebrate the good things. And I tell them something, not enough, that's the reason I'm doing this, not enough about my life, but I impress on them, if you want to get somewhere, you don't worry about the work. I said, you're growing up in a different society. I always tell them they should do more than just graduate. They should have a profession that they can get into. But I impress on them it takes hard work and nothing comes easy.